Now, the Bible passage I'm going to look at today is one of the most interesting and yet at the same time difficult parables of Jesus, often referred to as the workers in the vineyard. As one writer put it, God never deals with men and women on the basis of status, wealth, or even service, but on the basis of grace alone. Let me read to you Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through to 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those who came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. Those who were hired first last worked only 1 hour. They said, "And you've made them equal to us, who've borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I'm generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Now, the original hearers would understand and identify with this story. In the second appointment I ever had in ministry, it was in a county town in Durham called Darlington. Not our Darlington, but the original one on the borders of North Yorkshire and County Durham. Population of about 100,000 people, but many, many rural towns that were nearby. And I remember talking to Bill Gowland, who came from the same town, about the fact that very often people were employed in exactly this biblical way. People who got no work in the difficult days of the 1930s, we call it the Great Depression all over the world. They would gather in the square and farmers would turn up with their trucks and look and probably see who was the most muscular of probably they're all then men, in the crowd there. They could go and work with him on the farm for the day. So it would be a familiar scene. Not an unfamiliar situation, and many poor people would have found this to be a very challenging reality and seeking work in the marketplace. Yet many parables have this powerful twist about them, and it certainly has that. Keith talked earlier about writing pieces for the media. I mean, how would you write a story like this for the media? That some people who'd only worked a short period of time got the same pay as those who'd worked all day. But you see, God is the landowner, and he treats people fairly. Now, treating people fairly can cause all kinds of challenges, especially if we can't grasp generosity. And God is a generous God, one who cares not only for those who've got, not only for those who are skillful, but for all people. At Wesley Mission, we've always had a place for those who are poorer, for those people who have not been at the top of the pile, and yet they still need to be cared for. And Matthew shares the words of Jesus as a conclusion to this powerful story, talking about the last and the first and how it's equally important. One writer writing on this passage said there is no more cherished word in the Christian vocabulary than grace. Grace is what it's about. You see, grace defines the Christian faith. It puts a new take on fairness, and it helps us to understand why it is and how it is we can work alongside people of all kinds and realize that God has a place for them. Grace is not sentimental, but life-giving, life-transforming. And when I read that particular parable in the 20th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, I don't think it's just about workers. I think it's about God's nature. Jesus gives us an insight to what he is like. He treats people like that, like the thief on the cross, like the person who was cast out. It's all of them matter. They all matter to God. And this truth, I think, is such an important one for all of us. And we've reflected a bit on the history of Wesley Mission in this programme, inevitably. But I think that one of the things that's carried us on and through has been our concern to make sure that people that others might not have time for can find time at Wesley Mission in our people, through our people. This isn't just a job for one person, it's the whole mission engaged in an outreach towards those in need. So when you think about grace, when you think about the love of God for all people, it may not make sense to us always that those who've come in at the very last are treated just as well as those people who have been there a lifetime. But it's the truth. And it's the truth that we see in Jesus, in his life, in his death, and in the power of resurrection. May we ever, ever be a people who are concentrating upon the gracious love of God.